Do we have questions here?
Hi, my name is Guillaume Levrier. I'm from Sciences Po in Paris. Just a small question. How do you plan on regulating democratically in societies that are not really democratic, especially those who are really advanced in human genome editing and who has already done it on triple-nuclear zygotes and probably soon on embryos?
I think that's a really good question. I think it sort of picks up the question that I raised right at the end there. What happens when human rights and national sovereignty conflict? Obviously, the phrase that I didn't put up on the slide was this notion that there might be effectively rogue states, or at least states within which there are advanced scientific infrastructures but very little in the way of state regulation. One of the things that the Council of Europe is trying to do among other institutions is to foster, it has this sort of strapline, human rights, democracy and the rule of law. And that question about democracy, I think, is a really, has grown in prominence and importance for its work there. But I mean, I think the bottom line is that what one has to do is think about what you might call the ethical gradients between different countries or different states or different jurisdictions, and how one governs technology transfer, the movement of all of these things, knowledge, movements of knowledge, movements of technology, movements of people, among those things. Because, just to pick up a sort of phrase from Langdon Winner, technologies have ethics, you know, and they bring particular commitments, particular ideas with them. So I think it's a difficult thing, but I think that's where you start.
So Peter, so it looks to me that we keep saying about aiming to discuss about the global governance of genome editing, but listening carefully to what you were saying, it seems to me we have very little instruments that apply to all of us in this world. So not to say that the Oviedo Convention, it only applies to some countries, of course, European Charter and other legislations and other. So it looks to me that the only thing that we might have in common is the UNESCO Declaration of Human Rights, from what you said. Is this enough to sustain and to build all what we want to build?
I don't think it is. I don't think any of those things are, though. Okay, so the Council of Europe Convention, the Oviedo Convention, is only binding law in 29 countries. There are 47 countries that are members of the Council of Europe, and many more who are involved in the work. This is just to take one institution. And even where the convention itself is not binding, it has a persuasive force. The reason it has a persuasive force is it is clearly articulated. The arguments behind it are well articulated, and it has a kind of value for those who operate beyond the convention. I mean, as I say, I think the only thing you can do is to try to have those conversations across those ethical gradients, but not assume that everybody's starting from the same starting place. But the other part of it is not simply the content of the conversation you have, but the background of democratic institutions, democratic debate that you have within those countries, the quality of the public sphere, and I think, as the previous question suggested, there are some places where that doesn't exist, but that nevertheless have fairly advanced scientific programs.
There is two questions here, and then Alex.
This is more a comment than a question in reality, and that concerns the remits of what we are discussing. It's a point which I discussed previously with Hervé, knowing that what we call human are in fact composed of 90% of genes of microbes. And discussing that, in fact, if we think that, if I look to what you said and all what you said, I think these concepts raise other issues than the one you have raised on, during the discussion.
Yeah. Zohar Al-Hasnan from Saudi Arabia. I represent the National Bioethics Committee, which is the national reference for bioethics in the country. I would like to share with you the position of the National Bioethics Committee on this regard, but before that I would like to mention that almost 2 decades ago, when the introduction of the PGD was in its infancy in our country, people were asking whether this is permissible or not permissible from cultural as well as religious point of view. Now this question is no longer the norm. In fact, our center is one of the largest centers that is performing PGD across the globe. It's just how society reacts to novel techniques. Last year, the Bioethics Committee held a meeting addressing the ethics pertaining to genome editing. It was held in May last year to involve the public and the dialogue with the public. The language of the meeting was in Arabic. The lectures and discussions were in our language. The position of the committee and after the deliberations and the discussions in the committee is that we limit the intervention of this technique at both research as well as the clinic to somatic cells, and not to use it on germlines, and obviously not to proceed with the enhancement. I would like to conclude by saying that it is very important in our position in general when we approach difficult issues pertaining to genetics is that we highly value the dignity of the individuals as well as to the families in general. And this is very instrumental in our approach to difficult issues that are relevant to next generations. Thank you.
Alexei Greenbaum, France. I would be very reserved, if I may say that, on the possibility or the plausibility of having CRISPR enter into any sort of binding international convention or agreement or document. But fortunately for ethics, there's another instrument, there's another dynamics at the international level, which is the dynamics of imitating best practices. So rather than trying to have countries sign Oviedo that clearly don't want that, and we may not get there at all, what we may want to focus on is creating a pool, a set of best practices that we will be widely sharing also with countries not represented here. And this dynamics of imitation does work in ethics.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick comment on that. It works when it works. I mean, the issue with CRISPR, or one issue that CRISPR particularly raises, as I tried to say at the top of the presentation, was that it is accessible to a group of potential users who are not socialized within the usual terms of sort of scientific education and training, who would recognize the best practice in the way that you might describe it. But it's also subject to a lot of external, again, a lot of external drivers, economic drivers, competitive drivers, all these other things. You know, one has to sort of balance those things. Right.
Thank you very much. Last comment from François Hirsch, who will keep it very short.
Very short indeed. Thanks, Pete, for your presentation. I have a question. You mentioned that the EU Charter banned the techniques leading to eugenism. But what is the current definition of eugenism?
I mean, I think what your question is probably trying to draw out is the extent to which it covers individual sort of interventions within the context of reproductive projects, individual reproductive projects, reproductive choice. I don't think that comes within the scope of the provisions, those provisions. But then again, my supposition is that the mischief that provisions of that sort are aimed at is not those kind of choices.
Thank you very much, Erin, for your questions, but also your comments that are very important. And you know that today is not the end of the discussions, it's only the beginning.